Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Edmonds with Idaho News 6, and this is Making the Grade, our chance to talk everything education in the crazy mixed up pandemic world that we're all now living in as parents and educators. And of course, joining me via this new Zoom type platform, Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. The team at Idaho Education News has more to write about these days, it seems like, Kevin, than even ever before.
Yeah, it's been a crazy summer, and it just continues. Obviously, a lot of news and a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen heading into the fall. We're trying to stay on top of that and trying to give you, best information about what to expect and what what the debate is about at this point.
Well, and we love actually having this platform. Kevin and I have talked about this because we get the chance to interact with all of our viewers right here live on Facebook. So if you have comments or questions as we start to talk, if you have some thoughts that you'd like to share in the world of education, how you're thinking about schools reopening, that'll be our hot topic of the day. But we're also going to touch on a number of other things that are happening, including Reclaim Idaho's latest efforts and a new digital higher education plan. But Kevin, as always, we have to start with schools reopening because the state has now given guidelines to the districts on how they need to reopen. The governor, of course, last week holding his news conference where he discussed where schools really do need to get open. So this comes at us from so many different angles. And I know you're actually writing about the political angle, which is just one finger of all this.
Yes.
So where would you like to start, my friend?
Well, there's just so much to get to here. And obviously, as we've seen here in the past few weeks, this is the topic that everybody is most interested in. What's going to happen with schools in the fall? What can happen with schools in the fall? Well, what Governor Little came out with on Thursday and what the State Board of Education signed off on is a series of guidelines. And they really are just that. They're advisory, they're recommendations, they're designed to help school administrators, school trustees navigate the reopening and navigate the process of operating schools in the fall and beyond as this pandemic continues. But make no mistake here, the governor was very clear and said that his expectation is that schools are going to reopen in the fall. And that expectation really jumps out at me, and it really is striking when you see what's happening around the valley and around the state in terms of coronavirus case numbers. When you hear what some of the health officials are saying about coronavirus in the state, you heard a very urgent appeal from hospital leaders, from healthcare officials, healthcare leaders in the Treasure Valley about the spread of the pandemic. You saw Central District Health extend the mask directive to all of Ada County, not just the city of Boise. So when all of that is going on in the public health arena, you have the state saying that they really expect schools to reopen. And I was really struck by that wording and that tone in the context of what's happening with those case numbers and what we're hearing from the health community.
What I noticed was that there are basically three categories. And if we scroll down here on your story, you're going to be able to see those a little bit. The three categories, essentially, this mimics what we've seen from other school districts as they've already started to put their reopening plans together, Boise and West Ada in particular. But it's almost, they're calling it categories. I've liked to refer to it almost as a stoplight situation where you've got a green, a yellow, and a red, meaning green, schools are wide open. Yellow, it's kind of a hybrid plan of online learning and going to schools of some sort. And then a red plan where schools or districts are perhaps shut down. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a fair comparison. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. But here's the thing, and here's what we can't really answer for you right now. And we tried. Clark Corbin, our reporter who's been covering this reopening committee process much more closely than I have, and really more closely than any reporter at the state. When the governor had his news conference on Thursday, Clark asked the governor, okay, where would the Boise School District or where would the West Ada School District fall right now under these categories if you were having the kind of case numbers that we're seeing right now, if we were having the kind of spread that we're seeing right now. And the governor did not want to indulge the question. He didn't really want to answer the question. He said it was a hypothetical. Well, it's July 15th today, right? This is not going to be a hypothetical question very much longer. I mean, the Boise School District hopes to reopen on August 17th. That's, that's barely a month away. So where the city of Boise would fit in, where the Boise School District would fit in these categories, where West Ada would fit into, where Nampa would fit into, as we're seeing, pretty significant increases in case numbers in Ada County and Canyon County. That's the real question to me, and that's one of the big uncertainties right now about this reopening plan is, how much of an increase in case numbers is tolerable. Can you work with and still have schools open or stay open? We don't really know yet, and that's really going to be a decision that's going to be decided a lot and discussed a lot at the local health district level. And as we've seen already, health districts have taken very different approaches to staying open, to keeping businesses open during the outbreak. They've taken very different approaches to issues such as face masks. So we don't really know how the health districts are going to take this series of guidelines and how they're going to apply it. It's a big question right now going forward.
And also, as you said, these are just guidelines. It's not a mandate. And Crystal Lee is saying here, I will not have my children wearing masks all day at school. And we have to say that in these state opening guidelines, nothing like that was in the guidelines. They're saying that all of those decisions are absolutely local control, which means that their school districts who are going to need to put their policies in place depending on what they want to do, but also then working with the health departments. And, if there's a mask order in now all of Ada County, where that falls for schools that are inside Ada County. And Southwest District Health, managing the Canyon County and beyond region, is proposing a mask vote as well. So it's going to be fascinating to watch who really has control over some of these hot topic issues.
And that's really a good question. And I don't have a good answer right now. And I wish I did. If Ada County has a mask directive in place, as it does right now, does that apply to the schools? Does that apply to K-12? Does that apply to kids in school? Does it apply to staff? Does it apply to teachers? I don't really know. And I think that's, something we're going to have to, get sorted out as this thing goes forward.
Kevin, talk to me about the politics of reopening schools. We've seen it from the federal level, as you said, all the way down to the state level, with the tone that Governor Brad Little talked about in wanting to make sure schools do reopen in the fall. What role does politics play in all of this?
A big role. And I think it's become a much more politicized issue than even it was in the spring. When we closed schools in the spring, when the pandemic first struck, it was a very fast decision, but it wasn't as politicized as it is right now. It really feels like this is, it's definitely going to be a campaign issue in the presidential race. President Trump has made no bones about it. He wants schools to reopen. He expects schools to reopen. He's gone as far as to suggest that the federal government may try to withhold funds from schools that do not reopen. Now, whether he can do that, how he could do that is open to debate. His education secretary, Betsy DeVos, has been steadfast about this as well, that we have to get schools reopened. But how we do that and what that looks like is still very much unclear. So you've got a president who is, in a lot of ways, trying to normalize the coronavirus issue and normalize the coronavirus outbreak and move on to other topics as he seeks to run a re-election campaign. You have a governor who I think is taken a much more measured tone in terms of the rhetoric about the coronavirus and about schools, but has also made it pretty clear that he wants schools to reopen. I think everybody wants schools to reopen. I think that politicians and parents and teachers are all on the same side here. Everybody wishes we could just get back to normal and have schools open as we would any other August.
And in Idaho,
can you do it safely? And can you come up with a policy, a set of policies that can make that happen?
And Kevin, I'm sorry to interrupt you. In Idaho, the fact of the matter is that we are dealing with such different types of school districts, such different types of numbers, how kids get to and from school. It's just our state is different because we have such rural districts.
Yes, and we have very different geography. We also have very different numbers in terms of the cases, but we've also seen that those case numbers can change on a dime. They can grow really quickly. When you look at some of the coronavirus concentration, when you look at the infection rates, when you divide the number of cases by population, you'll find that some of the highest concentrations of coronavirus in the state are in rural counties. No question, we have sharp increases in cases in Ada County and Canyon County. That's been well documented, and that's a serious matter going forward. No question about that. But you also have high infection rates in some of these rural counties in southern Idaho and the Magic Valley. So, rural districts are not immune to this. Rural communities are not immune to this. We've seen that over the past few months of this outbreak, and I suspect we're going to see that continue to unfold.
I was struck that as we're talking about whether or not schools can reopen and children going back to the classroom, that the Idaho Legislature is now looking at possibly being a remote body come this winter. Where does that stand?
Well, where it stands is it's a proposal, and it's going to go to a governor's committee this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. What we're talking about here is the legislature wants to take about $1.25 million of federal money. This is federal coronavirus aid that came in this spring. And the legislative leaders are talking about trying to use some of that money to improve remote technology in the State House, to make it easier for legislators to work remotely, for the legislative process to unfold remotely. This may be used in the next few months as legislative interim committees continue to work before the 2021 session. It might be used for the legislature's organizational session that they have every 2 years after every election. That usually falls about the week after Thanksgiving. It might even be used for the 2021 legislative session, depending on what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic. So it's a proposal that the governor's task force, the governor's committee that's distributing this federal coronavirus aid money, they will meet this afternoon. They will talk about this proposal. We'll see what happens. I'll be covering it. It's an interesting proposal, and there's been, on our social media platforms, there's been considerable pushback about this because, for the same reason that you alluded to, Michelle, people saying, well, if we're expecting teachers and we're expecting kids to go back to school, and legislators are contemplating working from home, how does that all connect? And that's a fair question. I'm not dismissing it whatsoever. I will tell you, though, as somebody who spends a lot of time at the State House, who covered the end of the legislative session, who consciously decided the final few days of the session as the coronavirus pandemic started to break out, that I did not feel that it was safe to be there personally as a reporter, that I felt like I had to cover the final few days of the session remotely. It's not just legislators who are affected by whether this session takes place in person in the middle of a pandemic. You're talking about, and not just reporters. I mean, it's not us. I mean, it's everybody who cares about the public process, everybody who feels like they want to have a say in legislation and want to be able to do that and want to be able to exercise their constitutional right to free speech, to free assembly, and do it safely. They have a stake in what happens at the legislature and how the legislature conducts its business in a pandemic. So it's not just about how does this affect legislators. It's how does it affect every Idahoan who has a stake in what's happening at the State House. So it's a complicated issue. It's a more complicated matter than simply, our legislators going to be zooming in and conducting their business that way.
Carla's echoing what you've been hearing on social media platforms at Idaho Education News there too. They want money to work remotely and then send kids back to school. What? And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how all of this plays out. And as you said, the politics of it all as well.
I'm not going to dispute at all the timing of this and the optics of it. it's a tough sell. And you know, what Carl is saying is something we've heard from a lot of other folks. And there's, you know, people who have valid concerns about reopening schools and valid questions about reopening schools and sending kids back to school and sending teachers back to school. When you hear about something like this, you know, it does strike a chord, and it does, you know, it does rub people the wrong way. I get that.
Let's also talk about going online with higher education, because now there is kind of a revamped plan. It's kind of come back to life a little bit from Governor Butch Otter's days, even, where it had its infancy, of doing this digital higher education. I don't know if they've come up with a real name for it, but some have called it New U, as in new university, but basically an online university. And it's gaining traction because there's money now attached to it.
Yeah, and again, here again, we're talking about some of this federal coronavirus aid. Here we're talking about $4 million that the state wants to put into ramping up digital higher education. And you talked about New U. That was one of the options that was kicked around. I don't think we're going to have New U quite yet. So don't plan on getting a New U sweatshirt or getting a New U decal for your car. It's not going to happen. But what is going to happen, and happen fairly quickly if the state board gets its way on this thing, is you're going to have more of a portal, more of a marketplace for students to access online class offerings from all of the state's colleges and universities. And here's the thing, the idea of digital learning in higher education is not new. I mean, this has been going on for years. And Idaho universities and colleges have been, you know, offering quite a bit online. You know, the president of Lewis Clark State College, Cynthia Pemberton, led a project this summer just trying to do an inventory. How many certificates and how many degrees can we offer online? How many do we offer right now online? And among the colleges and universities, she found that there are about 200 certificates and degrees that students can get online. She was surprised. I mean, that's a lot. But the concern that she has, and the concern that the state board has, is how can we make this more accessible? How can we make it affordable? How can we make it easy? And how can we help, you know, people access what's already available? And then that can take any number of forms of people. You know, we could be talking about, you know, workers who are out of, you know, who are unemployed right now and want to get some career skills so that they're ready to jump back into the workforce. We could be talking about students in rural communities who just logistically, they can't move right now. They can't go to a campus and do face-to-face learning. Or you may have students who are concerned about doing face-to-face learning this fall, who want to continue to pursue their education, but they have qualms about going back to campus. So for a variety of different reasons, the state board wants to accelerate this, you know, this online model. They're not calling it New U, they're calling it more of an Idaho online, and thinking of it more as a clearinghouse, a place where, you know, where students, you know, traditional students or older students can see what's available to them and, you know, start to access these courses and start to pursue certificates and degrees remotely.
Maybe this will be one of those silver linings that comes out of the pandemic, that there's finally maybe some money and some time and some expertise being put into reaching a goal in Idaho, as we've talked about numerous times right here on Making the Grade, of trying to get 60% of Idaho's 25 to 34-year-olds to have some kind of post-secondary degree. And having an online option may actually move the state closer to that number. It
could, and it could start, you know, down that path, and would take a while for it to have that kind of a result. But you're right. I mean, this is something that Governor Otter put together a task force to look at higher education. That was 3 years ago. And this was one of the recommendations that came out of that task force in 2017. Let's set up a digital campus. Let's work on more of a digital presence for higher education, because in order to get the thousands of new college students into the system, getting degrees, getting certificates, we've got to get them into the system, and we can't get them all onto campuses. So That was the thinking in 2017, and I think it's still the thinking on the state board that if you want students into the system, you have to make the system more accessible and more affordable and more predictable. So I think you're right. And I think there are folks on the state board, Emma actually, who was on the governor's task force in 2017, said, she's excited to see this idea coming back to life. Nobody's excited about the circumstances that have brought it to a head, obviously. But she's excited to see that we're having this conversation again, because this is a conversation that, the task force was having 3 years ago, but it didn't really go anywhere after the task force. So, here we are 3 years later. We'll see what happens this time around.
Another conversation that's going to be had and is having right now online is the latest on Reclaim Idaho. They are moving forward after a court battle to get people to sign a petition, their online petition drive, to try and bring about some change to the way K through 12 gets funded in the state of Idaho, asking for some extra taxes coming from businesses and those people making over $250,000. They say by upping the tax on those groups, they could come up with $200 million.
Yeah, numbers vary, but between 170 million and 200 million is what they've talked about. So here's where we are on the Reclaim Idaho issue. As of Wednesday morning, Reclaim Idaho began gathering the online signatures on Monday, after 2 federal courts had sided with the group and said that the signature gathering process could continue. Reclaim Idaho says that it had collected about 4,000 signatures as of Tuesday. That's 2 days in, about 4,000 signatures. The group says it needs about 30,000 signatures to finish the process of getting the necessary signatures to get on the ballot. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not just the raw number. You have to meet the threshold. You have to have a certain percentage, 6% of registered voters, I want to say, from 18 of the state's 35 legislative districts. So it really does get complicated quickly, but the idea is you have to do this statewide campaign. You have to get the statewide level of support to get an initiative on the ballot. But anyway, here we are. Reclaim Idaho has gone online. They've started to gather signatures. They say that they've collected about 4,000. This is not done yet because the state plans to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's their last avenue of appeal. And what they want the Supreme Court to do is to stop the signature gathering process. So I don't see the Supreme Court taking on these constitutional issues of whether Reclaim Idaho's First Amendment rights were violated. I'm not sure that is what would happen, but I think what the state wants is for the Supreme Court to step in and say, this signature gathering process needs to stop. So it's unfolding on almost a daily basis. This has been moving very quickly through the courts. It went from U.S. District Court to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which ruled in Reclaim Idaho's favor on Thursday of last week. And now the state is going to kick this thing up to the Supreme Court, or at least try to get the Supreme Court to put the brakes on the signature gathering process.
When will we know about that, Kevin? Do you have any idea?
I don't have any idea, but you would imagine that since the signature gathering is going on as we speak, that the state would certainly hope that the Supreme Court would take this up fairly quickly. We will watch it closely and see what happens and when.
Where does Reclaim Idaho plan to put this money? I mean, it goes to the state coffers, but is there wording that sets it aside for something special?
Yes. So what would happen is if this passed as Reclaim Idaho has proposed it, and the initiatives are always subject to legislative review, so they may not get exactly what they've proposed on the ballot. But what they've proposed on the ballot is that $170 to $200 million that we were talking about would go into a special fund just for K-12, and from there it could be used to give teachers pay raises, to hire more teachers so that you can reduce class sizes, to help schools go to all-day kindergarten, because after all, the state only funds half-day kindergarten, and districts that go to all-day kindergarten have to make up the rest of the money to do that. You could put it into career technical education. So a lot of different potential uses for the money, and those are just a few of them. but the money would go into a separate account just for K-12. The idea being that then, the money can't be rated in an economic downturn and moved into other needs. You could move the money from K-12 to highways or to Medicaid or to prisons or what have you.
We should take a moment and mention too, another article coming out on Idaho Ed News this week is talking specifically about the budget when it comes to K-12 education. And we've talked about the 5% budget cut that Governor Little has requested of all state agencies, including the public schools budget. Yet the June forecast came out pretty rosy compared to where we had been in terms of tax collections.
Right. So the revenues came in a little bit better than the state expected, quite a bit better than the state expected. And, that does not change what the governor ordered on July 1st. He ordered a 5% across the board cut in agency budgets, and that includes K-12, and that includes higher education. So we're talking about $99 million for K-12. We're talking about $15 million or thereabouts for higher education. Those cuts are still going to go into effect, and agencies still have to come back to the governor's office, to the governor's budget team with their plan for implementing those cuts. And those plans are due, by the way, on Wednesday. So I'm trying to track those and trying to get a sense of how are the universities going to implement these budget cuts? What are the impacts going to be on programs, on students? So we don't have those answers yet. That's something we're working on, and hopefully we'll have those answers in the days to come.
Let's bring it back around to the reopening of schools, because it is the hot topic and will continue to be all the way through the fall. I'm going to bring up a number of comments here. Thank you for joining us on Making the Grade. And let me bring up a number of comments, and then we'll talk about these a little bit, Kevin. But Diane is saying here that how many teachers are older, more susceptible to coronavirus is what she's saying. What happens if teachers start calling out? If teachers can't come to work, if bus drivers start calling out, these are things maybe that schools are going to have to deal with. There's a comment here from Sandra saying we're not ready to open the schools. Someone will test positive, the school will shut down, schools will shut down again. And then Adriana is saying, I'm afraid of repeat closures of schools. If a child or teacher tests positive and the whole school or class does it shut down. She says that she was on board to send her kids back in person, but now she's sending them online until she knows that there's a more stable situation. And you keep hearing that from parents too, that there's a desperate need for stability. And yet I feel for the school districts because they don't know what's stable.
Right. I mean, who can predict where we're going to be in 5 weeks or 5 months? We don't know what this outbreak is going to look like down the road and how that might affect schools. And we don't know how that's going to vary from one community to the next. I mean, I can sympathize with everybody dealing with this issue. I can sympathize with, the parents we're hearing from today and the parents we've been hearing from every week. I hear what you're saying. And I'm grateful I don't have a school-age kid. I've said that before and I'll say it again. I'm grateful I don't have to make these decisions as a parent. They're gut-wrenching.
Well,
I think they're gut-wrenching too for trustees and for school administrators because you don't know what the future is going to hold, and you don't want to get it wrong. And this is a tough situation all around. That's I know I'm stating the obvious when I say that, but I think it's something we all need to keep in mind. Nobody's got the answers, and nobody's got an easy road here.
Well, and then we come up with constitutional questions, which I know that Jessica wasn't really putting that out there as a constitutional question for us. What's the plan for those students that have special needs? But under our state constitution, we are supposed to offer a free education that is service to all children. And so if you have a special needs kid, or you have a child who is somewhere on the spectrum, or has a plan that they're working through with their school, it just gets so complicated, Kevin, too.
And we know we have achievement gaps. We've talked about this so many times on this show. And special needs students are definitely susceptible to that. And one of the things the governor talked about last week when he unveiled and signed off on this reopening plan was those gaps have gotten wider. I don't think anybody would dispute that those gaps have gotten wider. And I think that's part of the reason for the push to reopen schools is that I think, the consensus is that everybody would want to see schools reopen and see students back in a more normal setting. But how do you get there?
And that's what we'll continue to talk about right here on Making the Grade as the weeks go on and districts make new plans and district health departments come up with plans for trying to get students back in school. We understand and we appreciate all the comments coming in here from Making the Grade. If you've been with us on Making the Grade, you know that we kind of end Making the Grade on a funny note because, you have to have a little bit of light during all of this. And since so many people don't know the answers to any of the questions we're asking, I know for a fact that Kevin can answer this question, which is he put on a pair of socks this morning for a specific reason.
I put on socks. I do that every day. But okay, so today, and Michelle, you can attest to this. We both know how summer usually works in the news business. These are sharks. So you got shark socks today. Here we go. Moving in. I feel like I need Jaws music here.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are sharks there because, usually, in the news business, it's usually shark season. News kind of slows down. You get a lot of stories about, shark attacks. I'm not diminishing shark attacks. I grew up along a beach. I'm triggered by sharks. I'm not, but we get a lot of shark news. But right now, so much serious stuff going on. I mean, this is, kind of wish we had a summer where, the news cycle was dominated by sharks, but not going to happen this year.
No, but I do appreciate the lightheartedness of your shark socks. So thank you for that. We'll just have to start getting you masks that match your socks. That could be the
that would be next level. But part of me hopes that we're not dealing with this for so long that we have time to build up a mask wardrobe to match a sock wardrobe. I mean, hopefully this is more of a stopgap than that, but who knows?
Kevin, we appreciate all that you do over at Idaho Education News. So many different comments and thoughts coming in, and all of you who are dealing with this with your own children as educators, we feel for you. And I think that's what, if we can bring a little bit of education, a little bit of light and levity and direct conversation so that we can figure out how to make this work best for Idaho to rebound and for our kids to have the best education possible.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for being here for Making the Grade. If you want to see all of these stories, go to idahoednews.org. Great work being done by the team there. Kevin, stay safe. Go wash your hands.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the questions, folks.